I made my entrance anyway. How's everybody doing? Good. I'll bring this right back to you, Donovan. Welcome to Writers in Conversation here at the Darkhorse Theater. Before anything happens, I'm going to tell you some important things. First, turn off your cell phones. If you don't know how to turn them off, I don't know how to turn mine off. Turn it to vibrate, or just, throw it in the toilet or whatever you need to do. Speaking of toilets, if you need to use the bathroom, this is not your door. This is your door, all right? So go through here, go to the left. Bathrooms are down the hall. If you need to escape for some reason, you can go out the way that we came in, but you can also come out here and go right out this way, and you're good to go. I want to give a quick thanks to Darkhorse Theater. Shannon Whitley, owner, is not here today. It's the first time she hasn't been here during one of our shows, which is very sad. But I want to give her a big thanks. We're here on the set of 23 by 1. It's written and produced and directed by Sean Witzel, who's going to be our guest in September, actually. So we never know what set we're going to have when we come in here. So imagine my surprise when I walked into this. And we'll see if Donovan, in fact, maybe in our interview we should just go in here. We'll see what fun we can have with it. But my name is Andrew McFadyen-Ketchum. I am what's known as a unicorn in this town. Does anyone know what that means? It means I'm from here, born and raised, okay? And I'm not just from here, born and raised, but I'm from like right over there. I'm from about half mile from here, native of Sylvan Park. And I went to Hume Fogg, academic magnet, and when I graduated, I left, as we were wont to do. And I've been all over the place doing all sorts of things. 13 years ago, I started a website called poemtheweek.com. And it's a literary website where we share poetry and expose you to living poets. Yes, they do exist. I'm one of them, and so is Donovan, as you're about to learn. And in all of these years that I've been doing that, I've been thinking I want to do some sort of literary show. I wanted to bring literature to people in an entertaining fashion. And I came up with all sorts of ideas, none of which were very good, until I stumbled upon this one, which is decent. And the idea was to bring in writers of all sorts. So Donovan, of course, is a poet. I'm a poet. Our first guest was Bill Brown, the poetry godfather of Nashville. Our second guest was Ruby Amanfu, who is a singer and songwriter. And so when I say writer, I don't mean just literary writer. So I wanted to start a literary show, but I decided I wanted to be more expansive than that. So on our guest list coming up, we're going to have scientists, we're going to have journalists, we're going to have screenwriters, we're going to have a lawyer. We're going to do anyone who spends most of their time or a large part of their employ writing. Okay? And the idea is they come in, they perform their work in some way, maybe easier for a poet than for a lawyer. And then after that, I interview them about their craft, their life, their work. And that's what we're about to do with Donovan McAbee. So that's the idea here. There's a sign-up sheet in the lobby for our email listserv. We've got some really interesting guests coming up. What month is this? July? Is this July? It's already July. All right, 2019 is flying by. In August, we're going to have Jeff Carr. If you recognize that name, it's probably because you know who he is. He ran for mayor. He runs the Infinity Fellowship. He is also a minister and playwright and poet and performer, and just sort of, he just does a little bit of everything. Very excited to have him. We'll have Sean Witzel in September, who wrote, produced, directed this. Absolutely fabulous person. Skipping October, in November we'll have Jeff Harden, and on from there. If you want to learn more about us, just go to poemtheweek.com and click Writers in Conversation. It's easy enough. I think that covers most of our bases. We know how to get out of here. We know how to use the bathroom. We know what we're here for. Okay. Now, because this is the 21st century and because I forgot to print Donovan's bio, I'm going to read his bio off of my mother's cell phone. And this is once monthly. That's the other thing to tell you. So when I think about people I want to have on the show, I need people who are invigorating personalities. And I met Donovan at a reading with a friend of ours, Amy Winmore, another poet in Kentucky, and instantly was like, I gotta have this dude on my show. This is his official bio. Donovan McAbee's poems have appeared or are forthcoming in The Sun, The Greensboro Review, 5 Points, Tar River Poetry, The Christian Century, Prism, International, Rhino, Jabberwock Review, and a variety of other journals. He grew up in a small town in South Carolina in the foothills of Blue Ridge Mountains, something that I hope to talk about. He earned a BA at Baylor University and holds a Master of Divinity degree from Princeton Theological Seminary and a PhD in contemporary poetry from the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. With a name like McAbee, you have to have some sort of degree from somewhere in Scotland, right? Donovan lives in Nashville, Tennessee with his wife and toddler son. He works as Associate Professor of Religion and the Arts at Beaumont University and as a minister of spiritual formation at Woodmont Christian Church. Please give us a warm welcome for Donovan.
It's McAbee.
Oh, my bad.
With your name, you have sat through
That's
many
true. I've earned that mistake.
That's exactly what I was about to say. And I was sort of practicing your name the other day, and I feared that I would still screw it up. McFadyen-Ketchum.
I'm very upset that you got it right.
No, well, I practiced that.
Let's give Donovan.
Thank you. Yes.
Say it again.
McAbee.
Another round of applause. Just for that.
Well, it's good to see you here. Thanks for coming out. I can't see you actually, which is probably good if you're giving me the middle finger. The lights are just perfect to blind me in a good way. I grew up in a small town. I grew up Southern Baptist, or I like to say I grew up Southern Baptist, and I have all the scars to prove it. But there are a lot of great things about growing up Southern Baptist, from overwhelming anxiety about spending eternity in hell, sexual repression, and just fear as being the primary way that you relate to the divine. So there are a lot of great things about growing up Southern Baptist. But one of those is the character called the evangelist. And the evangelist is someone who comes to your church at least once a year to tell you that you're going to hell, and then to tell you how not to. And when I was a kid, we had one come through several times who told you that you were going to hell and that rock and roll music was what was taking you to hell. And so he was going to help you purge yourself of the evils of rock and roll. And this first poem grows out of that experience, sort of a composite of several experiences from my youth. It's called Crusade Against Rock. The traveling evangelist with the permed mullet played Another One Bites the Dust, slowed down in reverse for our congregation. If we listened closely, he insisted we could hear Freddie Mercury, who sounded now like Darth Vader, testifying to us all, "It's fun to smoke marijuana. It's fun to smoke marijuana." We heard it nearly plain as day. The Lord isn't the only one who works in mysterious ways. The remedy must outdo the poison, the evangelist told us. The next night, I gathered up my own little stack of songs, said goodbye to F you, don't take it personal. Adios, easy does it. So long, straight out of Compton. The liner notes turned black beneath the melting plastic. We smelled the fumes of our youth group's burnt offering. Maybe this was what God wanted. But even now, my heart aches to think about that moment the flames took hold of Bob Marley's legend. His head cocked, his eyes knowing, and all those dreads suddenly on fire. So I don't know if I was exactly a free-range kid, but I spent a lot of time outside as a kid, usually without a shirt and often without shoes. We could afford them, but they just weren't always employed. But I loved playing Army. I was always the youngest kid in the neighborhood. My brothers were much older than me, and so I had to set myself apart somehow or other. And this poem might explain one of the ways I did that. It's called Playing Army. I died better than anybody. My older brother said so. He shot me from around the corner of the house. Pow, pow, pow. My body arched, floating back towards the earth, my rifle rolling through the air. They all stood agape to witness such fluid grace. I was so damn good, every kid on the block wanted to shoot me. I was fascinated by religion, and I guess I still am. I kind of do it for a living. At least that's what my student evaluations say I tend to do. But so at an early age, I loved going to other people's churches, to see. It's like, what are they doing over there? And I had an African American friend who invited me when we were in high school to his church, the Greater St. James Temple of the Holiness Church. What Willie failed to tell me was that his family didn't go Sunday nights, so I showed up looking for my friend, and he was not there. But it ended up being a community of faith that welcomed me in. I would go a lot of times on Sunday nights when I was a teenager to the Greater St. James Temple of the Holiness Church. And this particular poem sort of grows out of those experiences. It's called Sister Evangelina. I still don't know how that hat, the one with a sprig of juniper berries, managed to cling to the top of her head through all that. Her heels hammered against the sanctuary's wooden floor, double time with the kick drum, each beat an indention in the boards. She wiped away the sweat streaming down her face, spoke in tongues too strained to understand, rattled off accusations at angels, doxologies in a minor key. To that point in my life, I'd never seen heartache gather like a storm. I'd never seen someone shake loose their troubles from the inside out. So my parents divorced when I was about 12 years old, and after the divorce, my mom began to get more connected with her half-siblings who lived in East Tennessee. And so I would go up there in the mountains, hang out with my family who lived in places like Etowah and Tellico Plains and Sweetwater. And one of my aunts, they went to this storefront church that was run by Pastor Leon. And Leon had been in prison as a young man for various and sundry things. And he was illiterate. But in prison, he felt called to ministry. And he married this wonderful woman who would read the scripture for him, and he would craft his sermons. And eventually she taught him how to read. He learned how to read by reading the Bible. And so as a 13, 14-year-old kid, I'm going up to this mountain church in East Tennessee where Brother Leon was holding court. This poem's called Coming Back Down. What was it landed me, flat on my back against the floor of that storefront church? The preacher speaking in tongues over my laid out body as that lonesome gospel lifted me elsewhere. Mama helped me stagger back to the car once the service had ended. I'd never been to a church like that. I don't know what it was made the preacher single me out. Maybe I looked an easy target, or maybe he read on my face the signs of someone in need of a good dose of wonder. Whatever it was, that afternoon, as we drove through the mountains, I couldn't stop crying for the beauty of it all. My grandma, I'm going to look at it. Let me just start a timer. Am I doing all right? We've got a while. Just roll. So my grandma was one of the funniest people you'd ever meet. And she had absolutely no sense of humor, which is why she was one of the funniest people you would ever meet. The joke was she was never in on the joke. Like, she had no sense of humor. And she never met a cigarette she didn't want to smoke as well. That was one other thing about Grandma. But this poem's called Grandma's Last Rites. It must have been hell getting lost in a suburb, driving in circles for hours, not remembering which turn to take to get home. That's when they found the tumor in her brain. I helped the nurse lift her on the bed sheet. We lowered her into the chair and wheeled her outside into that crisp Midwestern air. She got saved, she told us again, at a Billy Graham crusade in 1948. Knowing her soul was safe with Jesus, she had only one request before she entered paradise. We found a pack in her purse, a lighter in the car. I took the first drag, then held it to her mouth as she smoked and smiled at that last cigarette. So, I guess we'll talk about what kind of weirdo were you that you sit in your room and write poems? I guess we'll talk about that in a bit. But I always scribbled poems down when I was a teenager, when I was in college, and they were awful. I mean terrible. Really bad, hackneyed metaphors, like America as an oak tree that's rotten. Like really bad stuff. And I remember reading, T.S. Eliot wrote Proof Rock when he was a freshman at Harvard. And it's like, really? Why you got to do that, Thomas? But what really made me begin to take the craft of poetry and writing in general more serious was really a depressive episode. My mom, I'm going way more into this than I intend to at this point, but the day I graduated from an undergraduate degree, we found out my mother had cancer. And my experience at seminary, I then moved from Texas to New Jersey, was completely overshadowed by her experience of cancer, and near the end of it, she passed away. But that first semester at seminary, when I'm still reeling through the terminal diagnosis of melanoma that my mother had received, I'm also in a car wreck as a passenger. My body is injured, and I'm depressed, and I can't think straight. And poetry became a way of engaging with the world when I couldn't sort of think straight. Is what it felt like. And in the wake of my mother's death, I was trying to write about that, but I didn't have the skill, if that makes sense. I didn't have the skill to make it art yet. And this poem is one of my favorite poems. I began it 5 years after she died, but it didn't really finish until last year. So these 16 lines took me only 9 to 10 years to do. I did other things in those years, but and I was really blessed. This just came out in May in a magazine called The Sun. It's a really good place, and when the poems you love find a good home, you feel really good about that. So if you think this poem sucks, then that was a big setup, but it's also grounded in Nashville, as you'll hear in the first stanza. Sightings. Shortly after her death, Mother Teresa appeared in a cinnamon bun in Nashville, Tennessee. She looked serious, perturbed even, as though this epiphany were an inconvenience. Once in the 90s, when statues of the Virgin were crying all over Ireland, one in Donegal did not get the memo. A sign hung around its neck announcing, "This Holy Mother out of order." I found myself 2 years after Mom died on the second pew from the front in a dark, empty chapel. I looked up at the 6-foot-tall wooden Jesus, votive candles at his feet, and I could see a tear falling over and over down his right cheek. A trick of light and shadow, but somehow in that moment I knew they were for me, those tears. This is a little poem called After the Fact. I know you by the space you leave empty. I draw lines in the air where the roof used to be. I wait for you, Lord, like a mailbox for a letter. The grass still wonders how the ground got there. One of the great things about poetry and all literature is you get to pick your ancestors. You get to pick the people who influence you in your own craft. And I want to sort of take a couple of minutes and read two poems by two poets whose work I really love. And the first one's by the Polish poet Wisława Szymborska. And Szymborska won the Nobel Prize. And she only published, but in a lifetime it's not many, maybe 250, maybe 300 poems. Not many. And a lot of people said, well, you've been a poet for a while. I mean, I'm only writing 1.6 lines a year at some points, but one would expect a Nobel laureate to have a better, bigger production. And she was asked, why do you publish so few poems? And she said, I publish so few poems because I own a wastebasket. So she just takes care of the chaff before it gets to you, the reader. So we should be grateful. This poem's called Under One Small Star. My apologies to chance for calling it necessity. My apologies to necessity if I'm mistaken after all. Please, don't be angry, happiness, that I take you as my due. May my dead be patient with the way my memory fades. My apologies to time for all the world I overlook each second. My apologies to past loves for thinking that the latest is the first. Forgive me, distant wars, for bringing flowers home. Forgive me, open wounds, for pricking my finger. I apologize for my record of minuets to those who cry from the depths. I apologize to those who wait in railroad stations for being asleep today at 5 a.m. Pardon me, hounded hope, for laughing from time to time. Pardon me, deserts, that I don't rush to you, bearing a spoonful of water. And you, falcon, unchanging year after year, always in the same cage. Your gaze always fixed on the same point in space. Forgive me, even if it turns out you're stuffed. My apologies to the felled tree for the table's 4 legs. My apologies to great questions for small answers. Truth, please don't pay me much attention. Dignity, please be magnanimous. Bear with me, O mystery of existence, as I pluck the occasional thread from your train. Soul, don't take offense that I've only got you now and then. My apologies to everything that I can't be everywhere at once. My apologies to everyone that I can't be each woman and each man. I know I won't be justified as long as I live, since I myself stand in my own way. Don't bear me ill will speech that I borrow weighty words, then labor heavily so that they may seem light. I'm glad she let out the one she did. And this next one, I'll just read one more poem by somebody else. It's by Philip Larkin, and I will give you just a warning that the poem has the F word in it. And since I'm a religion professor at a university that occasionally still demonstrates traces of its puritanical past, and in case a small child ends up listening to this broadcast accidentally, I will say effing instead of the actual word. But you can fill in the blank, dear audience member. Philip Larkin. High windows. When I see a couple of kids, and I guess he's effing her, and she's taking pills or wearing a diaphragm, I know this is paradise everyone old dreamed of all their lives. Bonds and gestures pushed to one side like an outdated combine harvester. And everyone young going down the long slide to happiness endlessly. I wonder if anyone looked at me 40 years back and thought, that'll be the life. No God anymore, or sweating in the dark about hell and all that, or having to hide what you think of the priest. He and his lot will all go down the long slide like free bloody birds. And immediately, rather than words, comes the thought of high windows, the sun-comprehending glass, and beyond it, the deep blue air that shows nothing and is nowhere and is endless. That's one of those, you hear country songwriters around town, you hear a song on the radio, wish I'd have written that one. As a poet, you feel that all the time. Why didn't I write that instead of Philip Larkin? That Emily Dickinson stole a great love reference to. This poem's kind of long. Most of mine are little ditties. This one's a little longer. It's called Visitation. And then there's the time I was walking down the sidewalk, and the sky burst open, and the clouds peeled back, and I saw 3 angels like Cirque du Soleil acrobats, ascending and descending on silk ropes hung from the heavens. The angels, the size of 747s. One's face resembled blind justice, another's the Statue of Liberty, and the third, Sinead O'Connor with clown makeup. I was stopped in my tracks, dumbfounded, discovered I was holding an ice cream cone that had not been in my hand before the vision began. 3 scoops high, though I couldn't eat it, stunned as I was with wonder at the display in the heavens, when suddenly they stopped. The angels hovered and pointed to me. They must have been 5,000 feet away, or 1,500 meters if you measure these things metrically. But I could see them clearly, their faces statuesque, their eyes squinting, ancient. Then a voice spoke. It was the clown-faced Sinead O'Connor, but she had an English accent, as all angels surely must. And she said to me, "Take the ice cream and eat. And the words that come to you, write them on a foggy mirror in the bathroom after you shower. Etch them in the sand just before the tide comes in. Scratch them with a nail into a table at the McDonald's at exit 398. Then change your life accordingly. We are the messengers of your making. And now, sit back and enjoy the rest of the show." And you should have seen what they did next. I was caught up in their ecstasy, ice cream in hand, dancing angels in the distance, and above their heads, nothing but sky. I don't know what it means either. I don't know. So like 3.5 years ago, my dad was visiting my wife and I here in Nashville. So before we had our first son, Aiden, our first child, Aiden, and Megan was pregnant, and so my dad came from a visit from South Carolina, and we're sitting out at the Sunday lunch table, and we're going to do the prayer thing, you know. So I reach out to say the blessing, and I look to my left, and my father had slumped over the table, and I began to shake him. I said, "Daddy, Daddy," and I couldn't get him nothing. And so I then take him to the floor, and I'm going, stroke, heart attack, seizure, what is this? And I could tell he wasn't breathing, so I began chest compressions on it, and my wife called 911. We have a neighbor who's a doctor, but we didn't know which townhouse he lived in, but another neighbor got it. And so I was alone with Dad for 2 to 3 minutes doing chest compressions, and then our friend came in and did the breaths and counted me off, and then someone else I never met in my life, who was our friend's mother-in-law, it turned out, took over for me. And it turns out that, so Dad had me doing chest compressions for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and then 2 doctors. Both of those folks were doctors. And then the medics were there another 3 minutes or later. Long story short, he coded 5 times that day, which when you're a 69-year-old man with many comorbidities, you don't tend to come back from that. But he came back. Long story, we can have a drink sometime, I'll tell you the whole thing. But this poem grew out of that experience. It's called Breath. All of a sudden, you slumped out of life, those bluest of eyes staring out to where form collapses, unaware in your awareness of the sudden blows back against the floor, the cracking of sternum beneath my hands, attempting to call you back from wherever it was you were wandering off to, forcing air into your lungs, the hum, high-pitched squeal, the call to clear, electricity lifting you for a moment near resurrection. I'll hold your hand in the ER as you die again and again and again and again. Epinephrine, norepinephrine, vasopressin, amiodarone, propofol, fentanyl, a dozen more dripping, portacath in your neck, femoral line, IVs snaked into both your arms, swan gans fish hooked through the heart's chambers. The plastic tube in your lungs jitters each breath. I sit beside your bed, hoping God might be bothered enough this time to answer a prayer. So since I'm it's kind of tense. It was much more tense to live than to write. And I remember showing that to my father. A few poems grew out of that experience. And my dad's not really what one would call a lover of poetry. He did not send me to my room when I was a child and say, "Don't come out until you've written a sonnet." It's not my household. But I showed it to him, and my concern was, will this re-traumatize the man whose body? The thing is, he had no recollection of the event. So he knew the pain after it, but in his memory, he lost 3 days. So for him, I think it served as a recollection of this experience that he experienced as an outsider, hearing about. Thank God. So I am a religion professor, and when growing up in a sort of conservative, evangelical, almost fundamentalist environment like I did, there's a lot of people saying about the arguments for God. The apologists, and it's a funny thing to argue for the existence of God, because if you believe in God, then God's not just like a thing among other things about which you can argue. Does that make sense? But being a religion professor, I have provided 2 poems that I call that are my contribution to the arguments for and against the existence of God. We look at these things through both sides. So this first poem is called Anecdotal Evidence for the Existence of God. Orgasms. Cotton candy. Chocolate-covered almonds. Coffee. River stones. That time after praying, when I would have doubted my own existence before I would have doubted God's. Tortoises. Ice cream. The ocean. And because I'm clearly, wanting to look at this from all sides, this is anecdotal evidence against the existence of God. The poor design and frequent malfunctioning of the prostate gland. Licorice. World War II. Dysentery. The Godfather, Part 3. All those times after praying, when I went away empty. Mosquitoes. Standardized tests. Every square inch of Orlando, Florida. This one's called Field Research. Writers are pretentious, and most writers like to talk about writing as much as they actually like to write. But this poem's called Field Research, and it's got a sort of an epigraph by Saul Bellow, who said, "I am not an ornithologist, I am a bird." A tree is not an arborist, nor a bird an ornithologist, nor, for that matter, God a theologian. But we are all anthropologists, all arborists, ornithologists, all theologians, no matter how poorly trained. Observe me, for instance. I couldn't tell a birch from a sugar maple if a white-billed woodpecker's life depended on it. And God, that cuckoo bird whose call I've heard, makes its nest in a tree I have no name for, in a forest I cannot seem to find. So growing up in the South, it's a Southern accent, in case you were wondering. The Waffle House is a center of cultural life in the South, much like the baths of Roman times. In more ways than we probably care to imagine. This poem is celebrating the Waffle House. It's not exactly autobiographical, but I enjoy it. It's called Waffle House Love. Nothing's open here at 2 a.m. except the Waffle House on the edge of town. Cigarette smoke wrapped in fried egg smell smacks me in the face as I pull open the glass door. I take a booth and order sweet iced tea. Maybe that's her getting out of that blue Mustang with a cherub's smile and a short black skirt. But no, there's someone else with her. It's 20 past, but I guess I'll stay. We'll laugh one day when we tell our kids that we met in the middle of the night at a Waffle House next to the interstate. In the True Love chat room, I just knew that Meg Ham 1986 was the girl for me. The way you know the earth is round, that Jesus saves, and that $2 bills will one day be worth more than $2, so you keep them. Just a few more here. This one's called Instructions for Prayer. Being a minister as well as a scholar, I feel the need to instruct people on things. Otherwise, how do I earn my paycheck? Instructions for prayer. Tear yourself away from the illusion that anyone owes you anything, especially that friend you lent $50 to. Consider it a gift, like light, like breath. Tear yourself away from the illusion that the things you cling to will cling to you when your grip loosens and your fingers slip. It's easier letting go before you have to. And while you're at it, this slaughtering of sacred cows, go ahead and tear yourself away from the illusion that the earth will miss your footsteps, the air, your breath, and that anyone's life besides your own can't go on without you. That won't be in Joel Osteen's next book, I know. Gotta cheer things up. I'm turning 40 in like 8 days. I'm feeling old. And I've been warning my wife, I've been sulking for a while, haven't I, baby? Yeah. And the thing is, I can't afford a convertible and I don't want to have an affair, so what am I to do? It's a real problem. But this poem's about aging, and it came out, it's funny, it came out this month. I kind of love that it came out in the sun on the month that I'm aging. I guess I'm always aging, so no matter what I'll shut up. It's called Holy the Body. I've thought so little of you that now you seek your revenge in the grinding of kneecaps, the tightening of hamstrings, loss of elasticity, the skin. So long neglected, you weren't even an afterthought. I apologize each morning with a handful of pills. Oh, scarred flesh of me in the mirror, as I turn the page on another decade, I bless the stretch marks on my stomach, evidence of those dead years when food was my one friend. I bless the crow's feet at the corners of my eyes, proof of days spent under the sun. I bless the gray in my beard, reminder that sometimes, despite ourselves, wisdom appears. I bless our breaking down, dear body. Pray the process is slow, that when time confronts us with its choices, you'll teach me when to hold on, when to let go. I think I got two more. Is that all right?
Yeah.
I got three, but I'll throw one up. So, before we had a little baby, we had this thing called freedom. It's a deeper freedom that we have now that we don't have freedom, right? But I remember when my wife would go back to Texas to see her friends or go somewhere, the house, how should I describe it, would become a pigsty. I mean, it was like I had just invited, like I became John Belushi from Animal House or something, just in terms of the messiness, I mean. But the house would look a bit of a wreck. And then there's the frantic moment before you realize that your loved one is coming home. You have to clean up. This one's called Dishes in the Sink. They're piling up pretty high now, spilling out onto the counters, taking over the kitchen like an invading army. The dinner plate from last night's delivered pizza, the bowl from breakfast with milk residue, hardened sweet cereal stuck to the sides, glasses from diet sodas I've drunk because I've been housebroken not to drink from the cans. I won't even tell you about the trail of dirty socks, trousers, and t-shirts dropped like breadcrumbs from the living room couch to our bed upstairs. And it would only dishearten you too much to know it's been over 48 hours since I've brushed my teeth, shaved, or showered. Much as I've enjoyed a reprieve from order this weekend while you've been gone, I can't wait to kiss your face at the airport, to bring you back home for a cuddle. You keep my train on the tracks, babe, my river inside its banks, and all poetry aside, I swear to God, I'm going to clean this place up tonight. This is the last one. All the poets I know are pretentious. Present company included. I'm kidding. But what poets do, they have many ways of showing their pretension, and one of them is by naming their poems with titles from other languages. And so this poem is called Corpus, which means body. Could have just called it body, but I want to be a little pretentious. Corpus. When God is silent late at night, and I'm watching the shadows the moon makes against the walls, I wish sometimes for certainty to know God like the fetal pig I dissected in high school, its legs tied back with twine on an aluminum tray, flesh obedient to the scalpel as I separated skin from meat, meat from bone, living silence from the silence of death. But I lie awake and listen instead to the wind-rustled leaves of the poplar, to the quiet breaths my wife makes as she lies here sleeping, and I pray or think to myself, which in these moments feels like prayer, oh, this is enough. This is more than enough.
Give a round of applause. Another one for Donovan McAbee. We're going to do a little set change, and then we'll go on with the show. So talk amongst yourselves, go to the bathroom, etc., etc. Let's give Donovan McAbee. I'm McFadyen-Ketchum McAbee. Yeah. Let's give him another round of applause. That was quite a reading, and I have lots of questions for you.
Yeah.
And
is that water in there?
That is.
What's wine?
Water into wine.
Yes.
You know, it's apropos.
I read about that once.
And you can enjoy it if you like. One of the questions I have for you is. So poetry and literature in general tends to be it tends to live in sort of a negative space. You know, it's about trouble. so many of your poems are not about trouble. I mean, yes, they are, but they're as I was sort of joking with the audience, they're happy. They're about positive things, So, talk to me about where your poems come from and how you tend to write about things that are maybe a little less dire than maybe this guy does.
I don't know, I feel like there's a lot of death in there, wasn't there?
Well, there was, but
Mother Teresa in a bad mood as a cinnamon bun.
yeah.
I think humor, I'm trying to think, so humor for me, humor is in the midst of the tragic too, I guess I got I'm not being very articulate right now, I realize that. So I think my initial attention to writing grew out of experience of depression. Come on back in the house. Grew out of experience of depression. But maybe it was my mom that gave me the gift of humor. So I sort of look at my parents. My dad is, the Southern thing going on, so there's storytelling. So when I go to my family reunions when I was a kid, one of my favorite parts was after a lot of people started going, like a couple of uncles just sitting around shooting the bull. And I love stories. And so from my dad's side, I feel like I get the storytelling thing. And my mom had a tragic life in a lot of ways. She grew up the daughter of two alcoholic parents and literally a murderous father, and didn't know where he was from the time she was about 6 to the time she was 18. She thought he was with his first family in East Tennessee. They thought he was with her. He was actually in Arizona in the penitentiary. And she experienced sexual abuse when she was 11 or 12, was married the first time when she was 16, had a child, my middle brother, when she was 17 and a half. That marriage ended, married to my father. My father's health became bad shortly after I was born. She had all of these things, a really hard life. And then, I remember, so I was in my 20s, and she gets this diagnosis of melanoma at a point when she was beginning, in my estimation as her son, to live for herself. She'd always lived for somebody else, But at 46, she's working in the fashion industry in New York City. She's living on Long Island, and she gets this diagnosis. And 3.5 years later, she's dead. And I had a lot of anger about that. I'm getting back around to the happy thing, I think. But she had this gift of, she had a dark sense of humor. And I can only imagine, if you met her, you wouldn't tell that. It's like you have to know her for that part to come out in our family circle. And it's a real gift. So I think there's that with the humor. I think I do dark humor. I think it's like a natural thing with me. But I also think that there's something about joy at the foot of death, too. And I remember having sweet moments with my mom in the hospital room as she's dying, making jokes and laughing, and there being joy in the midst of that. And so even though I think I initially began writing out of this place of confusion and pain, and I do think there's a lot of darkness there, and maybe I saved some of the darkness, like I kept it back for the reading, I don't know. But even in the darkness, I think there's humor and there's joy. And that creates a nice tension, too. Art always works on tensions. And I think maybe that's one of the ones that comes through in my work. Yeah.
Absolutely. You sent me many of your poems in advance, and I have, of course, seen you before. And one of the things that I couldn't help but notice was that it was positive. Maybe not happy, but positive in a way. Yeah. And I wonder if that came out of your ministerial duties. Speaking of which, Visitation, is that? So in Visitation, that's the one where he sees angels and there's an ice cream cone that appears in his hand. Is that true?
No.
Well, then you ruined my question.
I'm sorry.
What it was.
No.
So talk to me about that.
Sinead O'Connor in clown makeup
right.
as an angel the size of a 7-foot. But I would love that, were it true. What about the poem?
Well, so talk to me about that. So one of the things that a lot of people think is that poetry is always true, and we poets know that's not the case.
Yeah.
But when I read, you're a minister, and so I read this poem about you. Have you ever touched God in that way? Have you experienced God in that way, or angels, or had visions, or?
I wish, man. I'm trying to think how to approach that question. so I got that slave in the spirit thing when I was 13 or 14.
Right.
And that's an odd experience. I did not grow up in a tradition where someone's going to lay their hand on you and you're going to fall out. You know what I mean? And so I was like 13 or 14, and this Pastor Leon, called me out. I'd be like, I'm calling you, come down here. We've got a word from God. No, come on. It's okay. I'm just kidding. I'm not good. But
I was like, I don't know who he's pointing to, but you better come up here.
I was always cantankerous about any time I felt like I was being manipulated. You know what I mean? But this guy, it was weird. And I went up there thinking, I'm not falling out. I watch TV and I know what happens on the God channel, like Benny Hinn swinging his coat and 3,000 breath, like I ain't into that. This mountain preacher just went this and boom, I'm on the floor, and it was like, whoa, I'm somewhere else. So that's probably the closest to some sort of and the deal is, Pastor Leon was the real deal. This man was not driving a Cadillac. You know what I mean? Like, this was not money. I don't know what this was. It was an interesting experience. Another time, so one of the things I've been doing this summer is writing spiritual memoir, kind of nonfiction essays. And it's been a lot of fun. And I wrote about, I was an 18-year-old evangelistic preacher preaching 3- and 4-day revivals across the state of South Carolina. That's because that's what you do after your freshman year of college, right? That's what you did. You preached 50-something times that summer. And, well, we were usually at Southern Baptist churches, but this one time we got booked for a Pentecostal tent revival. And we did not know what we were getting into. I was an 18-year-old kid, and these leftover Jesus people who God had called to South Carolina in a blue school bus from Oregon were directing us to this tent. And we show up at it, and you know those signs with the arrow and the lights? And it said in big letters, Jesus appearing nightly, 7 p.m.
Hot damn!
Yeah. And I remember thinking, oh damn, I hope I go on before him because he's a hard act to follow. But in that experience, I again had a Pentecostal preacher single me out and call me up, and I did not fall, and it got awkward for everyone. Do you know what I mean? He kept pushing, and his men were behind to catch me, and it was just awkward. But whatever happened in that mountain church, at least in my experience of it, was real. And Pastor Leon, God rest his soul, he has since passed away, I found out a few months ago. I'm not going to blaspheme that. I will make fun of a lot of my religious experience growing up because a lot of it was, aspects of it were problematic. But no, I haven't had any sort of strange visions,
So what brought you to the church?
Well, I didn't have a choice. I grew up in the church. We went to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and Monday night visitation. But what's funny, I've come to a place in my life, I joke about growing up Southern Baptist. But when that's your context, like the best people I know in the world are Southern Baptists, and the worst people I know in the world are Southern Baptists. You know what I mean? And sometimes they're in the same family. But so I think, you get to a point in your life where hopefully if your religious background isn't just completely abusive, if it's not completely abusive, then my guess is, at least I have, and I think many people, you come to a point in your life where you can appreciate the gifts that were from that as well. Does that make sense? So when I was in seminary, I was friends with a Catholic, a young lady who was Catholic, and it was right at the time that all of the sexual abuse, the priests and the pedophile stuff was coming out. And I remember asking her one day, I said, how can you stay Catholic when you learn all this? And she looked at me and she said, well, that's where I learned how to pray. And I thought, well, that's pretty good, And so I laugh about my tradition, but that's where I learned how to pray. That's where I learned that the individual has eternal worth before God. There are aberrations of certain of those lessons that I find problematic now, that I will critique now, but a lot of the essence of the faith, even as I experience now, I can draw back to aspects of my upbringing. Yeah.
But how does that get you to? So okay, This is one of the things I'm confused about. So you're a minister,
ish,
right?
right. Minister-ish.
So I have an Instagram name for you.
Okay, all right. Let's hear it.
The Irreverent Reverend.
Nice.
Which might exist already because it's
yeah.
But you're a minister, which I want you to explain what that means. But so many of your poems really criticize the church. I mean, and just the way you talk about it. So how does that work out?
Well, aspects of the church. You critique what you love,
Yes, you do.
So I think the beautiful thing about poetry, well, I think the beautiful thing about poetry, but even the beautiful thing about a sermon is, well, any literary work, if a literary work can articulate a truthful ambiguity, then it's done us a real favor, So we've all been to sermons that are just asinine, and it's like 3 points, the 3 R's of faith. You know what I mean? That pretend that you can, just in these declarative statements, say, well, this is it, we wouldn't want to read a poem like that would not be very interesting. So why would we think a sermon like that's very interesting? So I think the things that I craft, at least if it's a sermon or if it's a poem, if you can articulate the tensions and the ambiguity, just giving voice to that is hopefully what good art and good craft lets us do. Yeah.
It was very quotable. What did he say just a second ago? We criticize what we love. It's pretty good. So let's get to poetry. Tell us the story about your first poem.
I don't know. I love, so I've read about this guy called Charles Sinek, and I got a book coming out about him hopefully this fall. But he's one of those guys who's like, I came to poetry because I wanted to impress girls, and he had some friends who were trying to impress girls, like when they're in high school. And he said, I read my friend's works and I thought, I can do better than that. So he went home and tried to, and I wish I could say that, but I just was never that cool. You know what I mean? It was like a really bad Old Testament prophet, like really hackney, bad writing. But again, it was that experience of feeling lost when I was in seminary that brought me back to literature. Mm-hmm. And so I couldn't think straight. Like when you're doing academics, in academics, you have to think linearly. I'm going to argue this because of this and this and this. So I found myself in my first year of seminary depressed, and I don't feel like I can think straight. And a friend sends me Flannery O'Connor short stories, and she sends me George Herbert's poems. And so I'm like, oh my God, I can engage with what's going on in my life in stories and in poems and in songs in a way that I'm having trouble as I'm trying to read academic theology and write about it. And so that was my way. I entered that world of literature, and that's when I started taking writing seriously. And I had the real blessing. So I was at Princeton Seminary, and at Princeton University at the time, there was an African-American poet called Yosef Kouign-Aoun, who was a really remarkable poet. And I got to have him as a professor. And I remember this would have been the first time I took my poems to someone to be critiqued, And isn't it great?
The first time you took your poems to be critiqued ever was to Yosef Kouign-Aoun.
Yeah. So it's like a Pulitzer Prize-winning poem. Yeah.
It's really ridiculous.
Yeah. So
sorry.
No. I take them to him in his office, and he walks with me through 11 poems for 2.5 hours. I mean, which is a gift for someone of his stature. And at the end of it, but when you share something creative that you love and someone is critiquing it, even with kindness, that first time it's like you feel it. I felt eviscerated. I felt like oh, here in my insides, I'm holding in my hands in front of you, Professor Kouign-Aoun. And I looked at him, and I said, "Is there hope?" And he said, "There's always hope." And the funny thing is, because I was so into writing poetry, sitting at the coffee shop, writing poetry, I wrote 10 more in the next week or two.
Oh, well, yeah.
Which is absurd, And so I then taken these poems, during his office hours, and he looks at me and he goes, "My goodness, you're prolific." And it was not a compliment,
Right.
But that was his way of saying, "Hey, slow down, spend some time with him. Slow down, spend some time."
That's pretty amazing. All right, so let's go to the slideshow.
Yeah.
All right.
Aww.
Talk about these people. Who are these people?
So set this up. You asked me to send you pictures, right?
Yes.
I'm just letting them know. Why are we looking at family pictures? So you're wondering that? So these are friends in Scotland. So I spent, I got to do my PhD in St. Andrews in Scotland. It's a great place to go. If you ever want to do a PhD and hang out by the sea and be surrounded by the ruins of a medieval castle, if that's your thing, that's your thing.
Okay.
But these people are great. I mean, so on the right is the McGladderys, and on the left the Kushner, Crumpling Kushners. So part of my last year there, I was essentially I lived a sitcom. So one of my closest friends and his wife, Kate, got divorced, and I moved in with her. Not in that way, but I rented the upstairs bedroom, and he was in an adjoining house.
Sitcom.
Yes, I'm telling you. I was like the uncle in the attic. It was like some weird contemporary version of Full House, except I was not as cool as John Stamos. You know what I mean? But so often at dinner, the two girls were much smaller now. They're now both college at university. But so I would sit down to dinner with my friend Chris and his ex-wife, and the kids would have eaten earlier. But it was fun, and me and Chris were in a band. And then the Crumpling Kushners were just some of the greatest friends. Peter, the first year I was there, I'd known him literally 2 weeks, and it was the 1 year anniversary of my mother's death. And I just called him, I guess probably weeping, and he said, come over, pick me up, and let's drive up the coast for the day. And so this person I hadn't known more than a month at the most, maybe 2, but I don't think, just dropped what he was doing for the day, and we drove up the coast to a couple of little Scottish seaside towns, and those two people taught me more about community and friendship. And so for me, that time doing my PhD, I started my PhD 10 months after my mom died, and it was a very healing place, the community experience there. It sort of came back to life in some ways there, I feel like. And that's when I went back. The summer I met my wife, I went over about 7 weeks, and that's where that picture's from.
Speaking of your wife,
There
she is.
Yes.
She's up there.
She's up there, pregnant with our second child.
Pregnant with your second child, coming in November.
Congratulations.
And that's your little boy. What about 2 years old?
He's almost 3. He'll be 3 in September.
Okay.
2.5.
What's his name?
Aiden.
Aiden. Okay. How is having
That's my dad, the one who nearly died on our dining room floor. Yes, and
so he's still with us.
still with us, thank God.
Okay.
He's 72 now. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So how has having a son changed your life?
Well, you're talking about what do you write from, and I always felt like when I was younger as a poet, I felt like I started with pain. You know what I mean? And I might get to the humor, but I always wanted to start with joy. You know?
That's what I was noticing.
I always want to start with it, but I haven't. I don't feel like I've been able to. So it's interesting that you say that. So I've got to rethink some things. But it feels like most of my writing started from pain. And when I married Megan, and I feel like about our relationship, I could then begin to write from joy some. And now it's interesting to try to write about fatherhood, because there is that thing. You got to do some dark poets writing about fatherhood, like. I think Donald Hall maybe has a poem about basically recognizing as he looks at his child that like he feels now a death sentence himself. You know what I mean? And there is something to that. When you have that next generation, like, oh crap, this is a sign. It's not good for my mortality.
I'm done.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's something to that.
Yeah.
But there's also that joy, And so I've tried to write about his birth. There's a little poem that might work, it might not, I don't know. But even in looking at joy, so think about the joy of having a child, is you have this child and there's joy, but there is grief because you and your partner are losing something too, And the nice thing is that poetry can give voice to the grief of what's lost, but the joy to what's being born. Like, boy, that's a sweet spot if you make that poem work. And I don't know if I have or not, I'm still tinkering.
I think you have. I think you have in a way that's a little unusual. So I'm going to zoom through.
Yeah.
And we're going to try something.
Let's try something. What is this? You did not tell me what this is.
So, by the way, I don't give anyone that comes on the stage any of the questions in advance. None of that.
Can you tell?
Yeah. So, you're a professor.
Yes.
Now,
He's changed a lot since Cheers.
Yes. Thankfully. Have you watched Cheers lately?
No, does it not age well?
Oh boy, it does not age well at all. But it's entertaining. Okay, so you're a professor.
Yeah.
Well, that's what's so great about the trolley problem, is that there is no right answer. This is why everyone hates moral philosophy professors.
I'm on your side here, dude, but he is not wrong.
Oh, trust me. When it comes to human ethics, I just know more than you. I've been studying it my whole life. It's just that it's so theoretical, you know? I mean, maybe there's a more concrete approach. Here, let's try this. Oh, God! Michael, what did you do? I made the trolley problem real so we could see how the ethics would actually play out. There are 5 workers on this track and 1 over there. Here are the levers to switch the tracks. Make a choice. The thing is, I think we speak your time to make a decision. Well, it's tricky. I mean, on the one hand, if you was right for a purely utilitarian worldview. Okay, so, what did we learn?
All right.
That was maybe a bit of an extreme way to think about it. But so, all right, so this is a traditional philosophical question. You're on a trolley with 2 tracks. There's 5 people on this. There's 1 of you on. Where do you go?
I don't know.
You're a professor.
But I'm not. I don't teach utility. I don't teach ethics. I hardly have.
I thought you were a religion professor.
Yeah. But I mean, so that's a utilitarian question. Do you kill the 1 person or the 5?
Right.
Yeah. I don't know. I would just say I hope that none of you are on the tracks.
Well, what do y'all say? Right? How does this work? You've got 5 people, 1 person.
Yeah.
You go to the 1.
Well, yes, unless you know them. unless like that's a friend and the other 5 are just acquaintances. You know? I might be nuancing the question a little too much for you. I'm sorry.
No, you're doing great. I mean, the question is more about being a professor of, well, what exactly you're a professor of?
I don't know either. I don't know. So this is the great thing. So I teach religion and the arts, or religion and literature. That's what I like, religion and literature. And I now teach these classes on writing for spirituality. So I get to kind of blur genres,
Right.
And so I haven't posed the trolley problem. But for me, it's about helping students engage with their spirituality through forms of the arts. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. What does that mean?
Elaborate, yeah.
Well, so I also taught Old Testament too, but I'm stopping that this year. Been doing it for a while. I think for me, I came to see that, well, okay, I'll back up. I had a professor in seminary who said, I don't know what I think until I write about it. And I've almost come to believe I don't know what I believe until I write about it. So that poem Breath, where I was going through the experience of my dad's near death, like when I landed on those lines, those last 2 lines where I go, gosh, my mind is shot right now, but it's essentially hoping God might be bothered enough this time to answer a prayer. Like when I wrote that, it was like boom. I recognized that I articulated something essential about my spirituality that I would not have otherwise articulated except through this medium. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so for me, writing, whether it's poetry or these nonfiction memoir, essays, is an essential part of my spirituality, coming to understand what I think and what I believe. And so I try to create space for students to do the same thing, whatever their given medium is, if it's a religion and the arts class, or through literature, if it's a writing and spirituality class, or theology and literature class.
Do you like God?
Well, yeah. What do you mean?
You come across like you don't.
What? I'm a practicing Christian. I'm not really good at it. That's why I'm still practicing.
Right. Is God a likable thing?
Well, presentations of God I've received might not be, but I believe. So it's like this, whatever we believe is probably idolatrous. Because whatever we believe, whoever we believe God to be, cannot be God exactly,
Right.
And so I think as we grow in age, as we come to recognize the partialness of the God we believed in, then that's becomes swept away, and we move into hopefully a deeper understanding of God and God's love and God's goodness and God's justice. I think that's part of the spiritual life, is coming to recognizing our beliefs themselves as idols, and yet also things that we needed to bring us to a particular point of maturity so that we could grow closer in that communion,
Mm-hmm.
Does that make any sense, or am I just talking?
I think it makes some sense. I mean, it's just being someone who writes poetry and works in the world of belief and faith in God, and that seems to me that you also work in the world of doubt.
Oh yeah, doubt's part of faith.
Right. If you, I was talking to my girlfriend about this like 2 days ago. It's like, if you don't doubt, then faith can't happen at all. And I think that I came to that realization. I've never really thought about it. I think I came to that realization from reading your poems. So I want to just sort of show some funny pictures of you.
Yeah.
That's a funny picture of
Yes.
you.
Yes.
Was that a new TV? Were you like, hey, look at my new TV, or look at my new white
the
suit?
suit was new and the TV was new. Because every Easter you get a new suit, Yeah.
Well, I didn't grow up that way, so I have no clue.
And that Mitsubishi TV was something for 1985.
And then this is you as I think that's an angel.
I was not a very happy angel, but most years I won my age division for the Halloween. And I remember thinking, they can't not give the trophy to a kid that's dressed like an angel at church.
Right, I mean, you're sure to win.
Yeah.
That's very
I'm Southern Baptist.
very deep of you.
Yeah, you gonna
Very
reject
deep.
an angel? No.
And then here's you in another white outfit and a cowboy hat and a trike.
Yes.
So this is your.
Oh yeah, 1985 was a bad year for everybody.
So this is your dad.
Dad with the handlebar mustache, man. Yeah.
That's a hell of a mustache.
Yeah.
I think you could.
Yeah, oh yeah.
You'd be good. Mom, who are the?
This is Darren, my dad's son from his first marriage, and Sean, my mom's son from her first marriage. Yep.
Okay. And then you're on the bottom
Blended
right.
family. That's me on the bottom right. Yeah.
Okay.
I was a cute kid. I didn't turn ugly until I was 8. It's downhill from there.
And this is you with Marilyn Nelson. I think this is at Sewanee.
This is Sewanee last year.
Were you a fellow or
I
scholar?
was a scholar, yeah.
Yeah.
Tennessee Williams scholar.
So where are you with your book?
Well,
You gotta be getting close.
I'm having as much luck with my book as I did with girls in high school. Yeah, it's rejection. I'm having good luck with poems.
Yeah, you're doing great.
Yeah, so I'm getting in good places. The Hudson Review just picked up 4 poems, which is a nice thing, But the book, in the world of poetry, those of you that don't write this silly stuff, publishing poetry is essentially a form of charity for a publisher. And I haven't gotten one to take pity. It's been like a semi-finalist twice and a finalist, and so I keep beating my head against the wall. But yeah, it'll happen. I think.
So you're like me.
Yeah, you've already got a book out.
Well, yeah. But
But Sewanee was great.
Lots of
Sewanee,
rejection.
you just go hang out on the hill with a bunch of literary people, and there's
which is going on right now. If you don't know about it, the Sewanee Writers Workshop that's down in Sewanee, which is about 2 hours from here. It's going on right now. You can check it out. Morris Manning, Mark Jarman. He's a local. We'll hopefully have him up here one day, but he's a bit of a hermit. I can't quite convince him to come. Let's have a little more fun, and then we'll get out of here. So I'm going to do a little personality test with you.
all right, man.
And y'all can do it along with us. So there's a banana tree.
Okay.
This is a very tall banana tree, and there's one banana, only one. All right, and there's a lion.
All right.
Okay, lion comes along, wants that banana, right?
Yes.
I mean, hey, lions love bananas. Then there's a giraffe.
All right.
Giraffes like bananas, right? And who doesn't like bananas? A squirrel. It's rather African safari, but there's a squirrel here. And a chimpanzee.
Uh-huh.
If you could choose who you would be in this scenario, if there's one banana and it was like the four of them all fighting for this banana, who would you be? What would you be? What animal would you pick? And y'all can think about this too.
What animal would I pick? Well, I mean,
You only have 4 options. You gotta pick one.
yeah. I reckon I'd be the chimpanzee to get the banana, but the lion could wait and eat the chimpanzee on the way down. You know what I mean?
So you could be the lion.
Yeah, let's go for lion.
You're gonna go for the lion.
Let's go for lion.
All right. What do y'all think you'd be?
Squirrel.
Squirrel? Be the squirrel. That doesn't surprise me one bit. Who wants to be the chimpanzee? We got 2 chimpanzees. Who wants to be the giraffe? Yeah, the giraffe. If your answer was the lion,
Uh-huh.
what was your answer again?
Well, I said lion because I thought, well, the chimpanzee's going to get the banana, but the lion
Well,
will
you
get
were
the
right.
chimpanzee.
If your answer was the lion, you are a fighter.
Click the next one. All
Your
right.
answer was oh, wait, sorry. Okay, wait, go back. All right, sorry. Your answer was the lion, you're a fighter.
All right.
All right, now we're gonna get back. Your answer was the giraffe, you're a logical thinker.
Oh.
So apparently you are not a logical thinker.
That will come as no surprise to my colleagues. Yeah.
If your answer was the squirrel, you're an optimist.
Oh.
That's dead on, by the way. It's my dad who said it, the squirrel. Your answer was the chimpanzee, you are a deep thinker.
Wow.
So let's go back to this line.
Uh-huh.
Are you a fighter?
I don't know, man. If you're not a fighter on some level, like life's just going to kick your butt and run you over. For some reason, my wife is smiling really big right now. I'm not sure what that means. I think I'm shy and retiring, aren't I, love?
Very easygoing.
Yes, easy going. Yeah, that's me.
You come off that way. Right. No,
I don't know if I'm a
that.
fighter. I don't think I'm a fighter. Am I a fighter? What you
Well,
think?
but here's what you said.
Yeah. Well,
You
I
said,
said
well, I want to
chimpanzee.
be,
Yeah.
this is what you want to be.
Yeah.
The deep thinker.
Well, there you go.
But
Yes.
the deep thinker comes down from the tree and
Yeah.
gets eaten by
Yes, the lion.
the fighter. And you
Yeah.
said, that's what I want
I
to
think it's
be.
because when you think this much of your life, when you I mean, the academics all have that. What's it called? Imposter syndrome. You know,
Mhm.
and people say fake it till you make it.
Mhm.
And the thing is, I think you never really make it, so you should fake it until other people think you've made it. You know. So I don't know if there's something about me that's just like accepting. I've embraced that I'm an imposter. You know what I mean? It's like I'm not a real academic. You know what I mean?
Right. But to be a good academic, I think you have to recognize that you don't know what the hell is really going on.
It could be. It could be.
Right.
Maybe.
Okay. You're a lion. Last question.
Yes, sir. What you got?
So, what's your end game?
In game.
What's your end game? What are you trying to do?
I don't know. I'm trying to figure that out. I'm turning 40. It's a crisis already.
I know. By the way, happy birthday in 8 days. What's your end game?
You know, man, I just want to write more. I've got a couple of projects I'm trying to do. So I want to get the poetry. I have the academic book coming out. I want the poetry book coming out.
Great.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thanks, man. I want the poetry. That's what you care about.
Yeah,
and then I'm trying to write these spiritual memoir things. And I feel like I'm a good public speaker. Does that make sense?
You're a great
So,
public speaker.
well, I wasn't asking for flattery, but so I'm trying to explore vocationally what that means to write more and speak more right now. That's what I'm trying to figure out. If we're just blunt and honest. And we'll see what that means. I don't know what it means. You know.
We can't afford a. What'd you say?
Can't afford a convertible, and I don't want to have an affair.
Don't want to have
Yeah.
an affair. So.
Yeah. Where's that lead me for a midlife crisis?
Yeah.
Ice cream.
Do I need more ice cream?
All right, everybody, let's give Donovan McAbee a round of applause. Thank you so much. this is the end of Writers in Conversation, episode 3. As I said, what are we in July? In August, we'll have Jeff Boffany Carr. In September, we'll have Sean Winsell. I really hope to see you here again. Thank you so much for coming today. At the end of the day, there's not much point in doing this if we don't have an audience to entertain a little bit. So give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you.